Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Jonathan Mardock. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Well, it's great having you. Thank you for your time. Jonathan, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I am 31. I'll be 32 in a few months here. I am a life coach, focusing specifically on health and wellness, dating, and clarity. And I've just hit my summer mark here, so I get the summer off. And usually half the year I go to Asia, Southeast Asia, and spend time in Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And I've been doing that for about 10 years now.
Being a life coach, I can only imagine some of the conversations you have with your clients.
Yeah, you do hear everything, especially in dating. You go down the rabbit hole with dating. You really do. But it's fulfilling. I mean, when you get people to open up and realize what it is exactly that they want, it changes their life. And they do most of the work.
Well, nothing wrong with that. I'm impressed by the fact that you do that. That's great that you help people out like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Growing up, you had strange experiences, some with entities and some without. What more can you tell us about that?
You know, when I was little, I was pretty sensitive to things. I was always sensitive to things. And I could always feel when something was off, when something was super positive. I remember when we had just a big mix-up, there was a party that my parents were having, and I must have been 4 years old, and I actually got left behind at the party. There was just so many people. And I had my tricycle, and I can still see it now. I can just remember I knew exactly where to go. I rode for probably half an hour home. And they asked how I did it. How did I get home? I just knew. It was things like that, trusting your instincts, knowing that you were right, knowing that you were correct, and trusting the universe and things like that. So having those abilities growing up, in the beginning it was hard, because sometimes when things come around, it can be very jarring. And I think people listening to the show, if they've heard any other guest on the show, that's the truth. Like, it's very jarring at times. And when you're not expecting it, something just pops out, or perfect timing will just walk across where you're walking. It's scary. But as time went on, I made it a point to, instead of fearing things, try to understand them. And I think more importantly, understand myself and how I react to those things. So when, let's say, I'll give you one now. When I was in 6th grade, I had still my best friend today. Went over to his house. We could, sit out on the porch late in the evening. When I say late, like up until like 5 a.m. It was a quiet town. It was back when you could really just get away with doing things like that. And we were sitting there, and right across the street, I saw this lady, and she must have been she had to have been like 10 feet tall, but she had like long, thin limbs and talons for hands. And she was just standing right over under the streetlight. So I see her. And then it was something completely unexpected. I turned away, kind of ran away, and my friend looks over, sees the same thing, and we both just run into the house. And of course, you know how it is when you go back. It's not there. That's always the case. that was one thing. I remember same friend, and I think this was the same year. This was back in 2001. And we went to the football game, the high school football game. We're walking back. It was around probably 8 o'clock at night. And there was an unused telephone pole on one of the streets. We walk by it and we get into the light of the next pole. And we see something shadowy come by. And we turn our heads and it forms a person on top of the pole, and like a very, very big person. And it looked like someone with a cloak on, but not over his head. It was just around his body and his. It sounds silly, but the best way I can put it is it looked like Dracula. That's the best kind of cape that I can say, that I can think of. And we saw that, and he just looked at us, and we stood there for several seconds, and then he moved maybe an inch, and we just bolted. And experiencing things like that, and it was really things like that before more of the positive things came around. I would say, I mean, there was shadow people and things like that, but the shadow people kind of disappeared as soon as I got into high school, because at that time I had started around 14 years old. So right before high school, I started to meditate, and I started to focus on, my breathing and the energy work and things like that, making it very, very positive and keeping a healthy mindset. And a lot of these things just didn't come around anymore. It didn't come around. But the cryptid things were still around there. And I don't know. I think sometimes if they can tell that you are sensitive, they'll try to make themselves known, because they can tell, oh, there's something about this guy. And some of them are, just as surprised as you are that you're seeing them too. Like, they think they're so hidden, and then you see them and the looks on their faces, it's a different story. So it's an interesting, I want to say, multiverse that we just live in. It's a very, very cool thing.
Oh, it's definitely interesting, all right. Yeah, no doubt about that. Talking about all these strange beings and entities that you've seen over the years, especially when you were younger, in our first conversation, it sounds to me like you just might have had a Rake encounter. Please tell us about it.
Yeah, and I didn't know it was a Rake until you and I talked about it. So this was with one of my other friends, and we were, so underneath this town in western Kansas is a series of like just sewer tunnels, kind of like, I guess, any place, but a lot of these had openings that you could go in. So we were down at this place called the Archer's Range, and in western Kansas, there's really not there's foliage, but it's pretty sparse. So the Archer's Range was one of those places where there was a creek, there was several trees that went on for about probably almost a mile. So it was dense right there. So we would hang out there after school sometimes and just talk about things and also experience things. And one day we were sitting there and we could hear in the tunnel, it sounded like a deep roar, a very, very deep roar. So we heard that and we started going towards it, and it kept doing it. And as we got closer and closer, every time it roared, it's like this thing's energy, its chi, its life force. You could feel the pressure of it. Like, it was just emanating. Now, we stand there for a few minutes like, whoa, that's some heavy energy. And it didn't feel negative or threatened or anything like that. And then we decided, hey, let's go in. So we go inside, and we didn't even we got maybe 30, 40 feet inside. And all of a sudden, this thing, and it's exactly how you described it. It looked like Gollum, had big eyes, very like super big eyes, like maybe the size of a little smaller than baseballs, and super thin. It was humanoid, had 2 legs, 2 arms, but its limbs were very like super skinny, and the way that it traversed, it coming out towards us, it was very insect-like, and it just it just screeched. It just screeched at us. That was how do I say it? That was pretty jarring. It was pretty jarring. I think it was more jarring for my friend than me, because I wanted to go back. But of course, if you grow up with it and you're more so used to it than other people, then you're going to, feel that way. Or you may not. But yeah. But the interesting thing about that is, even when it was screeching at us, I mean, we were probably maybe 15, maybe less than 15 feet from this thing. And when it came out doing that, it didn't want to chase us. Like, we did that. We ran. It didn't follow us. It didn't do anything like that. And as I was running, I can vividly remember, like, it's not going to get us. It's not going to do that. Whatever it's doing, I think it just wants its space. And I mentioned to you, there is a video out there on YouTube with a guy going into this sewer tunnel. The same thing happens to him. He goes in, this thing comes out and screeches at him, and he just hauls himself out of this thing, and, in a very frightening manner, which is understandable if you've never encountered anything like this before. But yeah, and the same Archer's Range that I'm talking about is the place where I saw the Goatman before too. He was about 12 to 14 feet tall. And I think that was the first time that I smelled. People describe these things how they smell. Before, I never got anything like that. This time, it didn't. It was not pleasant. It was not pleasant, but it was huge. I even looking back now, it's when you look at things like that, it's hard to believe, like, how does it support itself? It's so huge, and yet it's moving like it's no big deal. And that's what I always think of, is the sheer size of it and how it was just moving the way it did. And of course the sound it made too, which was a hybrid of goat and man. That's really what it was.
Hearing a spooky sound like that, the way you guys did, I can't believe that you actually went in the direction of the sound. I mean, Scooby and Shaggy never would have done that. What in the world?
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, but Fred and the rest of the group would do that. So there's those three. They would.
Yeah, that's a good point. They would. And what's the story? You can't just tease us about this whole Goatman encounter like that and then walk away from it. Please tell us the particulars about that experience.
Okay, so I was with the person who was with me for the Rake encounter and one other person. Now, this was around the time that both of these guys, they just stopped. They wanted to, gradually cut off interaction with me because I was into this stuff. I was also into stuff that 14, 15-year-old boys are into. I love life as well, but this was the encounter that really, I think, sent everyone over the edge. So this was after school. I think this was a Friday. So we had the weekend ahead of us, and we did spend the weekend together, but no one talked about it after it happened. But it was probably May. I remember it being warm out, and it was getting dark. It was sunset, starting to get dark, and we're in there, and something just felt like, it just felt like something was there. And we had known that there was things in this area anyways, so we liked to explore and see what we could find and checked with each other to see if we saw anything. That time I heard the footsteps first, and it just sounded huge. It just sounded huge. So we kind of go further. We go in deeper into the archer's range, and then you can start to smell it. And then you hear it. So we heard it. Then we're kind of looking. I'm the one who kind of went a little bit further because I really wanted to get a good look at it. So we're sitting there. We can hear it moving. We can hear it making its sounds. And there's about halfway through, there is a big opening over there. And there it was. It was standing upright, kind of just... I'm trying to think how I would describe it. Like, it was standing, and then it would kind of walk a few feet, and then it would stand again. But they saw it, and they were immediately quiet. I saw it and thought, like, I had never seen anything that huge before. And it's like I mentioned to you before in our previous conversation, is that it doesn't, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense when you're seeing these things that are, and they have animal features, yet they're humanoid. So when you see something like that, and I was somewhat used to it, but seeing something that big, and I didn't know Goatman existed, but you could see the goat eyes on it, though. They weren't glowing or anything. There was still light out, but you could see it. You could definitely see it. And, as quickly as that happened, they wanted to get out of there. I wanted to look a little bit more, but, I was with my friends, and I also just didn't want to be left behind with a, 12 to 14 foot goat man very close by, because I think it noticed us, but I don't think it cared. It was just, and the best word I can put it, hanging out. It was just hanging out. And after that, I think it was just too real, which I understand. It was just, it's almost too much for your mind to handle if you're not expecting it, if you're not in that sphere of experience, I would say. But we got out of there. But I remember looking back and seeing this thing just move across, and it was going to, in the middle of that opening, it was going to the outside of it and walking off. And then we crawl under the barbed wire fence, get out of there, and the rest of the weekend was me going, God, what was that? And them kind of changing the subject. But yeah, that was the experience with the Goatman. I haven't had anything. I've never seen any other creature like that, like a Goatman before. So, or after. So that was my experience with him. And it was a male, by the way.
I just hope you never have another encounter with one. One encounter with one, that's more than enough. Especially a 12 to 14 foot tall one. Yeah, that's a lot to wrap your head around. And by the way, speaking of the Goatman, what did its hands look like?
Long, but it didn't seem to have talons, though, like the Dogman do. It didn't seem to have that. It was kind of, so its skin was like a beige color. And it had kind of yellowish eyes with that horizontal, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the pupil? That's it. And kind of dark brown, curled horns like that of, a goat's head. And it was, I don't want to say it was jacked like a bodybuilder. I don't want to say that. Like, it had muscle, but it looked like it looked like, I'm trying the best way, like a swimmer's body. Like it was big, and it had, huge bone structure. It's shoulder to shoulder. It was massive, but it didn't have that bodybuilder look. Now, when it go down its arms, it did have longer arms, but they didn't look like the Dogman's. They weren't as long as that, but the skin was beige, and then the nails looked, I want to say black, but they were almost black. They were almost black and dark brown, like a coffee color, just straight black coffee. So it has a little bit of brown in there, but they were humanoid. It wasn't. Its legs were definitely, a goat. Definitely right there. Yeah. But its bare chest, it didn't have a lot of hair. It had hair in the middle of its chest, but its back was hairy. So it had humanoid hands, kind of coffee-colored, nails, and yeah.
That's all so strange. You said that it had yellow eyes. Are you talking about the pupils being yellow or the sclera? In other words, what would be the white of the eye looked yellow?
That's what I mean. Yeah, that part was yellowish. So, if you're, around a farm and you have goats, people who are listening, you know what I'm talking about. Like that area was yellowish, but it was not glowing.
Speaking of yellow, billy goats pee on their beards. I wonder if goatmen do that too, and that's why they stink the way they do. Anyway, we better talk about what we're here for tonight, Jonathan. Please tell us about your Dogman encounters now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Yeah. Okay, so it's July now. This was back in November 2019. And this was the week of Thanksgiving. And my dad and I were out here. We live in Estes Park. He lives here full time. I'm here half the time since I go off and go on my adventures and things like that. But we were out just one day, and we noticed that it was quiet. It was beyond quiet. And we thought something felt heavy in the air. There was no wildlife. You couldn't hear any birds or anything like that. And, keep in mind, towards the end of November, because the weather can be strange up here, there's still birds singing. And there's still, our native birds up here too, year round. There was nothing. We're out on the front deck. We look at each other. We're just like, yeah, something feels off today. Something just feels strange. And, we both go inside and continue our day. And I usually go outside before I go to sleep at night because it's so clear up here and you can see the stars so clearly. So I'll go out and look. I went out that night, and it just felt, it's like I said before, it didn't feel evil. It just felt like there was some pressure in the air. Like something that had presence was there. Definitely. Now, Tuesday is when I started to see it. So Tuesday, middle of the afternoon. So it was overcast. I go outside on the side deck that goes up our mountain. And I go out, and I just wanted to be outside for a little bit. I walk out, and so there's a part of our mountain goes up, and there's a clearing. Then the mountain picks up again, and it's steep. So I hear something, and I look. Over this clearing, I see this white blur jump out and then come down in my direction. And then it just U-turned and went around one of the boulders and went the other way. And it was so fast that it was like, it was so quick that I thought, did I really see that, or am I did I not see anything at all? But I remember the eyes though, and I remember its whitish hair, and I remember how big it was. Definitely. So that was the experience on Tuesday. Now on Wednesday is when I get to see it really in totality. Wednesday, I'm out on the front deck again, and it was just a cold, overcast week. I'm sitting out there, just kind of taking in that the start of the winter air. I look down on the road, and like right below us, right where my car is, I see this thing come up. So we live on a pretty steep road, and there's switchbacks and things like that. So where we are, I didn't even hear it. It just came over and hit the road, and it wasn't going as fast this time. And I wonder if it's because it wanted me to see it. So it hits the road, and as it's sprawling out, it's on all fours, sprawling out and grabbing the road with its hands, I see it's like a white werewolf. It was huge. It was huge. It had, kind of like a husky has a white husky has streaks of black on the undercoat of its fur and some yellowish on its back. It looked like that. And I remember seeing how long its fingers were as it gripped the road. And then it's almost like they throw themselves across distance because they have the strength to do so. I think about it, and I think that they don't necessarily run. They command the field. They command it. So it goes across, goes up the mountain, and disappears. So at that point, I knew, like, this is the same thing I saw the previous day. This is the same thing. And I tell my dad, I'm like, Dad, I'm pretty sure there's a werewolf here. And my dad, he grew up, he was, of course, with me growing up, so he knows that he's had experiences too. So he knew not to dismiss it. Like, my mom dismisses things like that, but my dad doesn't do it. So we talk about that, and he kind of gives me a look like, oh, great. And yeah, so that was that experience for that day. Now, the next day, so my girlfriend is coming up from Boulder, and during, this day, there was just this, it seemed heavier than normal. It felt very present. And, I didn't really want to be outside. And during this time as well, we had coyotes, same color as this thing, by the way, that would come up around 5 o'clock every day, just run past the house, and they'd run past and play a little bit, and then they'd go up the mountain. So, that was it was a fun thing for the previous weeks to see that. But today, that day, it just didn't feel like the right thing to do. So my girlfriend comes up that night, and she gets up here about 9 o'clock. So it's dark, very dark already. It was an overcast night. Now, the stars will give you a little bit of light, but without the moon up here, it's terribly dark. You just can't see anything. So it was one of those types of nights. And she gets up here. I go down and help her with her stuff, and she said, she says, "Hi, how am I doing?" And I say, "I think there's a werewolf here." Now, she's experienced some things with me too. A lot of it's been positive. And by the way, I don't want people to think that there's just scary things around me all the time. It's not like that. It's not like that. Most of the time now, ever since I've been in my 20s and crossing over to my 30s, it's normally incredibly positive things, especially here in the forest areas up here. So this was just one of those times. And I tell her that, and she's like, "Oh, great. Well, can you help me with my stuff?" So I help her. And as we're going up the steps to the house, I say to her, "You didn't forget anything, did you?" And she says, "Oh, no, I got everything." So we go up to the house. We have a pleasant evening. We're hanging out. Around 11 o'clock, she turns to me and she says, "Hey, you're going to hate me." And I say to her, I knew what she was going to say. And she says, "I forgot my phone in the car." And I go, "Oh, okay, good. Okay. Uh-huh." So I say, "All right, well, let's go get it." So at this point in time, right before she says that, I want to get this specific detail in there. I have 2 cats, and they were not acting like they usually act. My cat, Ed, he starts to hiss in the direction of the windows. And my other cat, Phoebe, she just looks frightened. She doesn't know what to do. And what happens is they eventually go over to my desk on the middle floor, and they just sit under my desk. They never do that, ever. They never do that. So I knew something just wasn't right, and things started to feel... That was the only time I started to feel threatened. Like, it was so heavy. It was so heavy. So she says she forgot her phone. We get down to the bottom floor. I'm about to go out, and I pause. And I've been doing martial arts for 20 years, and meditation and energy work and things like that for 16 now. So I know how to project positivity and things like that, and using it to just to help yourself, putting a positive aura around yourself for protection. And that is exactly what I did. I did that, and we go out. We hit these steps, and our motion light comes on for us, not for this thing. And I felt like something was directly to my left. I turned my head, and 15 feet away, I look over the bush, and there's this giant head. It was huge. I mentioned before that its head was close to 30 inches from the bottom of its where its neck is to about 30 inches. Glowing eyes, amberish, pointed ears. It had a pretty long snout, but it didn't look like it looked like a wolf. Like, it looked just... Take any of the underworld movies besides the first one and how the werewolves look. That's how it looked. It was beastly. So you can see its lower teeth kind of jutting out from its lips. And its front canines, of course, were out there. And we just lock eyes, and we're looking at each other. And we're sitting there for several seconds. And I just, as anyone says on this show, a few seconds feels like a long time when you see something like this. And this was my first werewolf Dogman experience too. So, I think there's, something in our subconscious too with wolves, or I don't know, you could even say like lycanthropy, that there's just a hidden sense of danger with that stuff. So I see it. But as I'm looking at it, that danger starts to dissipate. Then its eyes, it was like how other people described, backlit. But after a few seconds, it's like it shut off that backlight. Like how a flashlight, when you turn it off. And then you could see the light reflecting off it, like when you have an animal and the light reflects off their eyes in the dark, it looked like that. And then it just drops down. It drops down. So As it drops, by the way, my girlfriend didn't see any of this because as soon as she saw me stop and look, she looked the opposite direction because I don't think she wanted any part of it, which is understandable considering. Now, it drops, and during the interaction, that sense of threat, of danger started to dissipate. As soon as it dropped, it felt fine. So I keep an eye out. We continue to go down the steps to her car. We get to her car, and I tell her, like, yeah, I just saw a werewolf. It was right there. And, she, I forget what she said, but she wasn't really having it. She's like, she didn't want to see or really discuss the monster on the mountain. And she grabs her phone. We go up the steps. I'm still kind of keeping my eye out for that. The motion light is still on, but it only reaches so far. And when I say that you can't see that well on moonless nights and starless nights, you can't. So I could feel like it was still there, but it didn't, I didn't feel any danger. I felt nothing in that sphere. I just felt a sense of like, I'm here. I see that you see me, and I'm going to back off. And we go back inside. That sense of that threatening vibe that we got from it was no longer there. And the rest of the evening continued like normal. Like it was fine. And after that night, we never saw those coyotes again. We never saw them again. Now, I've mentioned this to people too. And a lot of people will say, well, it was probably just a coyote then. No. Out here, there's plenty of coyotes. There's also, the talk of wolves back in Colorado since about 2018. This thing, I saw it 3 times. And I saw how big it was. And when I saw it that close to you, there's no denying it. I know what I saw. So when people say that, well, you probably saw this. Well, I mean, really, how would they know? They wouldn't know. You have to take the time to care about your feelings on the matter and be honest with yourself. And if you're open to being honest to other people, my theory is on that. If you're honest with yourself, at the end of the day, it's such a cliche thing to say, but I think cliche things are there because it's true. At the end of the day, if you're honest with yourself and you fully understood that, you're going to be okay. You know what happened. You know what you saw. And it's good to have a support system. And there is a support system. But, when it comes to certain family members or friends throughout this type of thing, it really is what it is. And if you know what you've been through, that's the important thing. Plus, there's, shows like these to where you can talk about this stuff and be honest with absolutely everyone, I guess.
I gotta tell you there, Jonathan, I really like the way you think. It's no wonder that you deal with these experiences so well. That's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Vic.
Oh, you're welcome. No, just telling it like it is. When you went outside and saw that huge one that night, you said you didn't feel any fear. Do you think that's because your earlier experiences with entities and cryptids dulled your response to seeing them, or do you think it was due to something else?
No, I think it was due to, so when you have experiences with these types of things, you can tell what's out to get you. Their spiritual energy, their intention, if they want you to feel it, you can feel it. And sometimes, I've walked into places where you just know something's there, and it doesn't want you there. It just doesn't want you there. And you don't, I mean, you respect it and kind of, but I'm the same way though. So if something comes around and I don't want it around, I kind of project that out too. And most of the time it keeps its distance. So when I went out that night and felt that, or even before we were up in the living room, I think it was I think it just wanted to see like how we talk about how these things, they just want to test you sometimes and just see what you're going to do, which is very true for a lot of these things, by the way. Like, when, like I said, when they know you have that sense about you, I don't want to say that they want a piece of you, because that's the wrong way to put it, but they just want to go, oh, well, what will happen if I do this? What's going to happen if I do that? And when I went out and looked at it, it clearly, that feeling it stopped projecting it. That's what happened. It just stopped projecting it.
Considering how you had already seen it 2 days in a row, did you have the feeling that Thursday that you're almost guaranteed to have another encounter with it? It sounds like you did.
Yeah, it was definitely a build-up. Yeah, from that first day where it was just like this supersonic blur to the second day where it just shows up over the road. Now, by the way, it didn't look at me then too, but I wonder if it was just, I don't want to say gallop or prancing, but it wasn't in a hurry. And I wonder if it wanted to see me. So when Thursday rolls around, it was like, especially when waking up to that feeling all day, it was like, yeah, something's going to happen tonight. You just know it. But you get used to that, though, if something like that is around. Because, again, it's most of the time you'll catch glimpses of really beautiful things that the universe has to offer.
It sure is too bad that you haven't seen more of the beautiful things, because it sounds like you've been exposed to quite a few of the bad things.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, it's funny now to me, but when it was happening from a kid, and then all the way up into through high school, I would say when I was 20, that's when it kind of started to really change. But also, I became a lot wiser during that time too, and I was making it a point to project positive energy. But the older you get, the more understanding you have. So, going through some of that stuff when you're younger, it ain't easy. It's tough, but there's a payoff to it. There's definitely a payoff. It's funny. Like, when you see people who act big and tough and it's very rampant in like the States and the West that people do that type of stuff here, is that, they want to project this sense of, I'm strong, nothing can bother me. And something comes around and it scares them. You just don't, you start to take people like that just not as seriously, because you know it's an act. You know how to handle it yourself. So you become more positive and understanding towards it all. But yeah, in the beginning it was tough, but throughout my 20s, that really dissipated and made way just for just really good things. Like even simple things that anyone can experience, like, sitting on the beach in Thailand, like white sands, and seeing this tropical water and feeling the flow of the universe, just feeling things like that, and knowing that bad things do happen. Like I told you, I've had cancer twice, but there's just this wonder and amazement to the universe that when you open yourself up to the resources that the universe has to offer, which are infinite, these types of things, they're just another thing that happens. And they can also be positive too, if you let them, which is hard to do. Like that's a tough thing to do. Because when you're not used to it and something comes around and you've never seen it, like I told you, some of those friends that I had, they went down a road that they didn't recover. And a lot of it was because of this stuff. But if you open yourself up to support, like you help people and you find communities that are really into this stuff. And now is the best time to do it because, I mean, look at the internet now. I mean, there was forums in like 2001, but look at it now. Like now we have shows like this. So there's help for everyone who has an experience like this. So I think everything's worked out.
It sounds like it has. Well, like I told you before, I really do like the way you think. It's all attitude. You put a positive spin on everything in your life, and yeah, you just reap the rewards from doing that. That's great. Well, Jonathan, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yeah. Anyone who has an encounter or has a continuous encounter, one of my tricks that I've always done is that when I started to really, this is in my 20s, and I started to, in a way, stand up for myself and go, I'm here too, is that if anytime something came around, and this is up to the person who's listening, I would always just talk to it. Anytime I feel like something's there, I would casually talk to it and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. And a lot of the time it seemed they would either leave because they realized that if they had a negative intention, they would back off because they're like, oh, this person's not afraid of me. Or they would just become a little more curious and just kind of sit back and look at you the same way they're looking at them. So depending on what you want to do, that's something that you can try. And I think it's important for everyone to know, if you're scared, the universe has an infinite amount of resources for you. You are stronger than you think. You're stronger than you know. You really are.
That's all very well said. Goodness gracious, Jonathan, I need to put you on the payroll. I'm impressed. Well, yeah, I want to thank you so much for coming on and telling us about all those experiences. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Vic, you're the man. I really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone who's ever been on the show, too. Like, you people you're warriors. You're warriors. Always remember that.
They are. You're right. They are. Well, Jonathan, thanks again so much. Have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.